Thank you. A special thank you to CISO Platform for having me today to speak about cybersecurity challenges of the Internet of Things. It's a great topic, and I'm looking forward to presenting to you a little bit about what the Internet of Things is, a little bit about the history, and particularly, of course, what the cybersecurity challenges are to protecting the Internet of Things. So, in discussing the Internet of Things, you really need to get a little bit of background about what the Internet of Things is and how it got started. Looking into my research, I found out that the earliest mention of it was in 1999, and the term was actually coined by Kevin Ashton, who was a co-founder of a Auto ID Center at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And he used it to describe the interaction of the various devices he was using. The term really didn't become mainstream until 2010, about 11 years ago, when the emergence of Google's Street View came out and provided users with pictures, 365 view times of all around the world, street level, etc., large quantities of data, and they called that the Internet of Things. Since then, of course, the Internet of Things has taken on other meanings. So what really is the Internet of Things? The Internet of Things is really moving to become the Internet of everything. Machines, systems, people, pretty much everything connected to the Internet. And nowadays, with the digital transformation, and particularly with what has happened with COVID-19 and a large amount of us transferring to most of our work at home and also using our cell phones, Internet of Things surface is greatly expanded. It in other definitions, it more technical, it refers to the general idea of things that are readable, recognizable, locatable, addressable, and are controllable via the internet, which is pretty much everything that I just mentioned. And then basically it's people, data, machine to machine, machine to people, and what's amazing about this is it's all connected by trillions and trillions of sensors. So we're really being connected into one big one big body of everything connected of machines, people, everything. So it is the Internet of Things, is the Internet of everything. So connecting IoT. The firm Cisco predicts that we have approximately 50 billion devices now, which is our smartphones, our appliances, our office equipment that are connected by the sensors I just mentioned. That's a lot of sensors. But by 2023, there will be 3 times more network devices on Earth than there are humans. That's an amazing thing to consider. The fact that the proliferation of all these devices and our dependency on them is growing so exponentially. And according to IDC, by 2025, an average connected person anywhere in the world would interact with connected devices nearly 4,800 times per day, basically one interaction every 18 seconds. So currently, almost about 70% of enterprises have networks that are made up of Internet of Things devices and computers. This is from Forrester. I think it's probably even higher than that. This is just a couple-year-old stat. Estimations now project that the Internet of Things security spending, in accordance to all those connections, is growing at a compound annual growth rate of 44%, will reach almost 4.4 billion by next year. So, like I did with everything, with dealing with cybersecurity, dealing with emerging technologies, you have to follow the money. And looking at IoT investments, this year alone, spending of Internet of Things is going to reach nearly $1.4 trillion, larger than most of the growth GNPs of countries. And McKinsey & Company estimates that the IoT will be valued at 4.6 trillion just for the public sector alone in the next 10 years. And Cisco estimates at 14.4 trillion value to the private sector. So as you can see, Internet of Things is widely being used by both public and private sectors, and in some cases, meshed between the two of them. So the Internet of Things is a lot of things to different verticals. This chart here is just a quick overview of how it plays and where the investments are going. So you see a huge amount of investments going, of course, into home automation security. You may have your Ring camera, you may have all kinds of other devices, Alexa, etc. Vehicles, which is now becoming quite a thing, particularly when autonomous vehicles come online with your sound systems, your other elements involved in it. Cities, smart cities, integrating the public health, transportation, security, logistics and navigation, shipping, health and human services. Humans, we're becoming extensions with our wearables, work sites, retail environments, factories. There's just pretty much, there's no vertical where the Internet of Things is not touching something. So what is the Internet of Things explained in more of a cybersecurity terms? And that is really what I'm speaking to you about today. There are really 7 layers of Internet of Things in terms of when you look at it as a cyber element. The layer 7 is the transformational decision-making based thing, the apps, the data, the people, the processes. Layer 6 is the custom applications you built for that device. And layer 5 is the analysis that comes from that device, the reports, the mining, the machine learning. Layer 4 is the harvesting of that information, the storage of stuffs in the Internet of Things, the data ingestion. Layer 3 is the cloud infrastructure that's used to connect it. Public, private, hybrid, managed, all types of clouds. Layer 2 is the connectivity of all these protocols that involve in the Internet of Things, M2M, Wi-Fi, telecom, you name it, it's in part of the Internet of Things. And of course, layer 1 is really the device, the sensor itself, which is the element of Internet of Things. So when you talk about cybersecurity, you're talking about different types of challenges in the cyber world for the Internet of Things. You are for networks and other aspects, and for PCs, etc. The reason is that IoT really complexity magnifies cyber risk. It differs from conventional computers because they're highly specialized and usually very small, both in physical size and computing capacity. They just don't have the mind span of a computer to process data. They generally have relatively limited memory and processing power, as I mentioned, and they're delivered in a basic, easy to use initial configuration that leaves up the security to the owner, and there within lies the problem, because they're all set with default passwords. And most new users don't change those passwords. So the configuration that was set up is left wide open. And also, one of the other elements of protecting cybersecurity with the Internet of Things is you just don't have the visibility, and you lack the ability to determine if a device has been compromised or is not performing as intended. Or, if a device has been compromised, it might be spreading to all your other devices. So monitoring the Internet of Things is a huge cybersecurity challenge. This slide here demonstrates why it's such a challenge. The IoT attack surface has so many vulnerabilities. As I mentioned, there are 50 billion connected devices. And then there's going to be basically 3 times more devices networked than there were devices on than people on Earth. And then you have this huge amount of connectivity and security incidents surrounding these elements. And so if you look closely, you'll see pretty much everything with IoT is unencrypted, about 90% of it. So your personal and confidential data is available through these devices throughout the network. More IoT cybersecurity vulnerabilities. So organizations remain highly vulnerable to IoT-based attacks. They've impacted about 67% of enterprises, and this again to Forrester. The research, which was surveyed, had 540 security pros talk about what they found, and they found that 84% of the organizations have IoT devices on their corporate networks. It also indicated that 50% of these organizations don't maintain necessary security measures beyond default passwords. So you then have basically, 40% of these companies out there, organizations, not really paying attention to the security aspects of these devices. And that, again, comes a huge vulnerability. And if you're looking at in terms of what just happened with Colonial Pipeline, it wasn't because of IoT, but there's the same paradigm here, is that if you're involved with an IoT system or IT system, You have to know what's on your system, what visibility you have, and what you need to do to isolate it and segment it. And unfortunately, in this case, they were not able to do that very quickly, so they had to turn off their IoT systems. So that's just the reality of these things today. More vulnerabilities. 98% of all IoT device traffic is unencrypted, exposing personal and confidential data in the network. 98%. So, I mean, you may be involved in a government program that has, heavy encryption, but for most of us and most of industry and most of governments around the world, we don't have that. Then 57% of IoT devices may be vulnerable to attack. That was from Palo Alto a couple of years ago. Again, if you're looking at every 1 out of every 2 targets is an easy attack for a hacker, what does it tell you? And then only 1% of security professionals think their current security controls are adequate. And that's sort of frightening because that's 1 out of 5 companies or governments, but probably more towards commercial end, that they're not confident in what they have on their security, and that they're running the show. So that's a very significant issue. So hackers are increasingly using non-standard ports to gain access to IoT devices. These ports are not typically covered by proxy-based firewalls, so they get to the devices pretty quickly online. And every one of these connected devices is a potential entry point for hackers, and they're used very effectively. I mean, it's very difficult to stop an attack when you have so many different ports to enter. Internet of Things devices face 5,200 attacks a month. This is the average, while 1 in 36 mobile devices has high apps risks installed on it. This is according to Symantec. So this is, a lot of these IoT devices, when you think about it, your phone is an IoT device. So almost every one of us has a phone. And so for a hacker, getting into the phone is a primary means of doing a breach. And so, closest to us, the phone is what we need to protect most. Attackers can also turn on IoT devices and bot and infect other connected devices. And this is really what is called the distributed denial of service attack, where you can use bots and overwhelm a website or a business or whatever you're trying to accomplish in that element. And so it's a very frightening scenario. Again, it just makes there's incidents a few years ago where cameras were hijacked, IoT devices, and turned against a system. So what they're doing is basically taking everything that's connected to it and sending bots in to overwhelm it. So ransomware is in the news a lot recently. You hear it again with Colonial Pipeline. You hear it with hospitals every single day, and it's really become a primary way of extorting for hackers. And the ransomware attacks accounted for over half of all malware attacks in 2020. And if you look back just to 2017, the WannaCry attacks impacted thousands of institutions and loss of connection of hospitals and universities in over 100 countries. So you're really dealing with the ability for hackers to go through networks very quickly when they're connected. Okay. So the really good resource for this, if you're looking to learn more about how to protect the vulnerabilities and what the vulnerabilities actually are, is the General Accounting Office report. It's put out by the U.S. government, and it highlighted the primary threats to Internet of Things and goes into detail, which I recommend you read. But these are the primary attack threats, which I list is denial of service, which I just spoke about, malware, of course, passive wiretapping, structured query language injections, which control web applications, wharf driving, which is searching for Wi-Fi networks and a person moving in a vehicle. That's done a lot in coffee shops nowadays. In zero-day exploits that may have been actually from the very beginning part of the problem. Type of breaches most common with the Internet of Things. Malware breaches, still the most common of all types of attacks, largely done through phishing. In the middle attacks, when you have a network and a system, there's an opportunity for someone to be in between you, between the device, between the server, and often that's how more sophisticated hackers steal data And of course, nation states use that method all the time. Brute force just to break in, denial of service attacks, and physical tampering, and and encryption. But basically, everything you talk about in security, and I make this point often when I speak to groups, is that security for cybersecurity is the same as security for physical. You have to look at all the elements connected to the device, whether it be software or hardware, and who has access to it. So if you're in an office, you have to protect that office. If you're in a data center, you have to protect that data center. So it's not just the digital aspect of it, it's the physical aspect of it too. So getting to that, IoT supply chain security has really become a top priority among governments and companies, largely because it's been third parties who've been able to exploit supply chain vulnerabilities through IoT devices and the ever-expanding mesh of networks and devices. So with all these extra supply chain endpoints combined, and let's say any kind of project or program you're doing, whether it's a manufacturing program for business, or where it's a point of sale system where you're connected to a variety of databases, you have all these different elements now of access. So supply chain security is a top priority. And primarily, if you're going to look at this, there's what is called the zero trust paradigm, which you really want to focus on, that anyone dealing with in your network and your chain can't be trusted. No matter if they work with you for 30, 40 years, they have malware that they don't know about that's implanted in their system that can connect yours. So again, it goes down to the connectivity issue, and having the ability to basically do vulnerability assessments on your own chain capabilities and follow protocols and also monitor it is really critical nowadays. We all have this now. I mentioned it earlier, IoT cyber threats to households. During 2020, because of remote work when COVID-19 happened, our home networks became our home offices. And of course, each of these new devices became part of the IoT network. And Comcast found that the average household is now hit with 104 threats every month. And that devices that they include in this are our laptops, computers, smartphones, and tablets, any network cameras and storage devices, streaming video devices. So it's really everything now connected, and it's beyond your toaster and your refrigerator. Now you have to look at yourself is a home office and a top target for any hacker. I like this cartoon because it really exemplifies the state of the art right now. It's funny, but it shows that everything talking to each other, but not far-fetched. Last year, MIT did an experiment where they were able to hack into a computer through a toaster. So the idea that you can't hack into a toaster or refrigerator through a toaster or refrigerator or Alexa device or anything to your sacred data is very true. And so this is a funny cartoon, but it speaks reality. So IoT attacks on the mission critical infrastructure are another element that we're hearing a lot about. And I mentioned again colonial pipeline, which is not necessarily an IoT attack, but attack on the IT itself, although it may have some what we'll find out. They haven't released the information of how they got into the system. But in pre-pandemic, Siemens Ponemon Institute study found that 56% of gas, wind, water, and solar utilities around the world had experienced at least one cyber attack that caused sudden loss down of operation of data. And I know a lot of you on the East Coast of the United States now are saying, seeing your gas supplies dwindle and the prices go up. This is a result of an attack. So this IoT, IT, OT convergence, which is the IT systems converging with the operational systems, which usually are like SCADA or industrial systems, shows a huge now attack vulnerability surface area because they can jump. And it's increasing by 30% every year. But the real issue here is that they really have different cybersecurity requirements. You don't want to take down a power plant and everything it's doing in the industrial control part from an IT breach, which you can take an IT breach, you can take everything offline quickly and find out. But when you're with an operational technology system, you're actually taking down the performance of that critical infrastructure. So that has a different implication, both in the need for the consumers and also in the operational efficiency of the company. So cybersecurity is in IoT is really, I look at, you know, the best case example for Internet of Things, security and vulnerability at the same time is healthcare. Checkpoint Software Technologies found that there had been a 45% increase in cyber attacks targeting healthcare since last November. No accident with all that's happening with COVID-19, a lot of mimicking of fake sites, people being phished to give up information for vaccines, for healthcare studies, et cetera, that were not real. So that was logical. Then BitGlass found that last year that there were almost 600 healthcare breaches that collectively affected over 26 million individuals. I'm hearing that's actually larger now. And in 2020, the average healthcare firm took about 236 days to recover from a breach. So if you're a healthcare institution and your responsibility for your patients and everything going on in the system, having that downtime is very scary. And most of them just not are protected because they don't have the budgets or the resources or the capabilities. So COVID-19 was a wake-up call. It showed that there was a massive increase in the use of IoT-connected CT scanners, patient telemetry systems, such as blood pressure cuffs, EMRs, airflow machines, et cetera. So all those devices are part of IoT and vulnerable in ways in to those healthcare industries, hospitals, facilities, and are often used, you know, for ways in for ransomware. More stats. U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, has recently released an alert highlighting imminent cybercrime threats to U.S. hospitals and healthcare providers. And they found that 51% of these threats for healthcare organizations involved imaging devices. That 72% of these healthcare VLANs mixed to IoT and IT assets, allowing malware to spread from users' computers to vulnerable IoT devices on the same network. So the challenges for the healthcare industry are, you know, there are many, but here's a couple of them, is a growing connectivity and vulnerability of these networks. The networks, devices, and data. They have people coming and going, integrating systems, different buyers for different products, even different networks for nursing and medical, etc. They all have very tight security budgets because their primary thing is putting everything into medicines and technologies and equipment to help patients. And they also operate in a landscape of legacy systems. Very common that a lot of these products and networks involved in servers, et cetera, in healthcare institutions and hospitals are not new. And it's not just them, it's a lot of other issues too that operate on this legacy system. Oh, with respect to IoT risk to medical devices, the FDA is working aggressively to reduce the risk factors of IoT-based medical devices. They even named their first acting director of medical device cybersecurity, a person named Kevin Fu, which shows the seriousness of this issue and how much attention they're paying to it. And FDA researchers discovered 19 vulnerabilities called Ripple 20 impacting the communications stack found hundreds of millions of connected devices, including IoT medical device tech. And medjacking attacks now are becoming more common. We allow hackers to attack and manipulate the software of medical sensors. For example, the infusion pumps of insulin that were hijacked a couple of years ago, and also using the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth sectors that you may have in your phones to get into other networks. So this is, again, one of the things that's very concerning to me. You know, everyone is affected by healthcare. Everyone gets sick. Everyone has to go to hospital at one point. And having them vulnerable, and particularly to ransomware attacks, is a frightening aspect of IoT. So this is a nice little chart of connected medical devices. As you can see, if you're working in the healthcare industry, you know, pretty much everything you do in your workspace has some connection to some other device or some other system. So it's a very big responsibility. So, all right. Talked about a lot of these threats. So, you know, what do we do to help ameliorate the situation? Well, the first step in anything dealing with cybersecurity is risk management. So anything starts with that. So you have to have a viable IoT risk management strategy that will require stepping up Assessing your situational awareness and policies and training, your technology integration, your information sharing, your mitigation capabilities, and cyber resilience. That's obviously a lot of things, but required. More specifically, a cybersecurity framework should be defined by the most basic elements and best practices in managed risk, which is layered vigilance, the intelligence and surveillance, readiness, operational capabilities, your visual command center, your interdiction technologies, and your resilience, your coordinated response and mitigation recovery. Now it's a mouthful, and I all urge you to get understanding of what risk management is, not just for cybersecurity, for anything you do in your life. To go in more detail, what do the IoT experts think about what they need to do to prove IoT security? And they give some very realistic and important answers. One is authentication of who you are. There's a lot of people that borrow other credentials and access that they shouldn't. The second part is access control. Who has privileged access to the system? What happens when someone leaves? Do they still have access? Are they taken off the system? Third thing, data encryption. If something does get breached, and often it will, out of your control, you should have it encrypted, so the attackers can't steal the information and use it and sell it on the dark web, or use it ransomware. And so that's really important. The rest of these are a lot smaller, but I mentioned that a little bit too. The portal gateways into other systems are what is known for IoT. But I'm going to again return to some remedies. So what securing the IoT entails is you need to bake in security design in the process from the beginning. Of course, that's easier said than done. As I mentioned earlier, most of this equipment technologies can be dated and old, not the new ones. They could be obviously checked up, but this again, referring to that poll I just showed you, the authentication, you embed your sensors, machine-to-machine interaction in IoT. You segment and firewall your IoT devices. You can use hardware-based trust anchors known as roots of trust. You don't necessarily have to have everything connected in that way. Security, analytics, and monitoring, very important. Visibility and alerts to the organizations about any malicious activities that might be taking place in the background or breaching any of the protocols. There are a lot of firms and companies that do that for you. And using public key infrastructure, you basically have for authentication, encrypting, etc. Pretty commonplace now, but not well understood. So 4 quick steps I recommend for securing IoT: encrypt everything, all communications to and from devices. It prevents man-in-the-middle attacks, not eliminates them, but it makes it difficult for basically the average hacker that's really trying to get at your data. Never use a hard-coded username or password that's given to you. Always change it. You scan all your software up front for vulnerabilities. It's estimated that 90% of all companies compromises are due to exploits of known vulnerabilities. So you already have the information of what's out there, but most companies are just not paying attention to, they're ignoring it and they're getting hacked. And then now with new technologies such as AI and machine learning, we can learn to fight security issues by automating a lot of these stuff, and particularly the analysis and detection of anomalies. The IoT X security pledge is really takes that, what I just said, to more specifics, which is no universal passwords, secure interfaces, use proven cryptography, encryption, security by default, verify your software, automatic security updates, have a vulnerability reporting program, and know when everything expires in your system is really important too. So we're lucky now, I think, and it goes both ways, but we're lucky now to live in an era with emerging technologies. Machine learning, artificial intelligence are particularly impacting IoT. And before I mentioned that, because of the smart sensors, they're able to really enable quicker analysis of what needs to be done operational and for efficiency, but also detect error, analytics, and also monitor. They could do vulnerability studies and They affect basically every type of vertical that we're involved with. And so 80% of enterprise IoT projects are expected to include artificial intelligence a major component by next year, says Gartner. So this is where the trend is, where the industry is going. The good of it is that, you know, that it really helps free up a lot of people, that there's not enough cybersecurity resources and people available anyway, and it automates a lot of your defenses. The bad news is that the adversaries are also using it to find vulnerabilities and find ways in, particularly with automating phishing attacks. So a checklist for securing IoT. I'm covering a lot of things here, but I think that it's because it's not a simple ABC thing. There's a lot of aspects to it, but you know, inventory and do a vulnerability assessment of all your devices connected to your network. Create an IoT cybersecurity incident response plan. Compartmentalize IoT devices to minimize attack surfaces. Add security software, containers, firewalls, and devices to digitally fence network and devices. Update and patch vulnerabilities to both networks and devices. Do not integrate devices into your network with the default passwords and other known vulnerabilities. And establish privileged access for device controls and applications. And encrypt, especially data in transit, and also data at rest. I mean, because you can still access your data at rest if it's not protected. But that's my basic checklist for securing IoT, and I'll make that available to everyone listening to this today. But I think it really is what any business can do, any individual can do with their own devices too. So I think these are really the basics, and if you follow the basics, you're less likely to get breached. I continue that checklist: security by design, defense in depth, zero trust. Those are the themes that are used by cybersecurity experts to develop strategies and frameworks. Cybersecurity by design now has really been, you know, particularly with industrial cybersecurity, really important. Build the stuff up front, defense in depth. You'll have a lot of different firewalls, segmentation, antivirus, pretty much include everything you can in the toolbox to defend yourself. And then zero trust, just don't trust anything connected to you. And other things now being done, adding to my list, is use strong authentication and perhaps biometrics for access control. Consider cloud security as a service. There's pros and cons, but usually cloud is more secure depending upon what world you live in. Integrate emerging technologies for protections, including machine learning and artificial intelligence. Continually audit and use real-time analytics, including predictive analytics, and that relates a lot to machine learning. Monitor and share threat intelligence. Often in cybersecurity, you find that it's been done before to someone else nearby you, whether it be a competitor or someone you're working with. You need to share threat intelligence, and it shouldn't just be in government. It should be in the commercial sector too, and it should also be in government and the commercial sector. Implement awareness training for employees. Yeah, always important. What not to click on. And most employees will make mistakes, and so the more training you give them, the better. IoT policy issues are also a consideration with cybersecurity. There's a lot talked about this. I won't go into depth about this, but there's a best commercial practices and a lot of compliance and regulation associated with IoT. There's a Cybersecurity Improvement Act that specifically relates to IoT, and the act calls for guidelines for cybersecurity device identity encryption, which we talked about, you know, to support security among IoT devices. 5G is another thing that's impacting us as it's going on system now. That means that everything is being enabled faster. Connectivity is faster too, but with connectivity becomes you know, more endpoints, quicker access and quicker processing, which means also that the hackers can use that too against you. So when you unleash a massive IoT ecosystem that can serve billions of connected devices, you have to look at you know, what this new speed, latency, and cost means in terms of cybersecurity. The routing points, you have to do the monitoring process. It changes the game a little bit. So companies that are using 5G have to evaluate their strategy or go back to policy framework of what they can best do to ameliorate the gaps that may come from faster downloads. So there's international IoT standards that have been talked about for many years, and some adhere to. Again, you can imagine that the complication of IoT when you think about that anyone can build a device anywhere, and they're built all throughout the world, every country. But they don't have the same standards. There's standards groups. The IEEE, Standards Association, is working on creating a cross-domain architectural framework called the P2413 standard for architectural frameworks for the Internet of Things, which is great because they're a very good engineering organization, probably the creme de la creme. The Industrial Internet Consortium also proposing an IoT standard for critical infrastructure, as we see again with the recent attacks. And the M2M Alliance is developing technical specifications that address need for common machine-to-machine services layer. So there's a lot being done, and there's a lot of cooperation, but not enough. So NIST also has standards, and National Institute of Standards and Technology, Department of Commerce, really good resource for anyone in any kind of business that wants to learn about any type of cybersecurity. They have lots of publications that are directly related to those operations. But they have a standard called the IoT Device Cybersecurity Capability Core Baseline that has dealing with the specific components of IoT to support standard cybersecurity controls, device identification and configuration, data protection, logical access to interfaces, software updates, cybersecurity state awareness. If you follow this policy guideline and standard guideline, and you build your business and practice around that, you're doing it on the right track to cybersecurity yourself and IoT better. Of course, one final thing, Internet of Things, as it blossoms and booms, there's going to be a lot of new jobs, and of course, a lot of these jobs are going to deal with protecting that in cybersecurity, what we're speaking about today. But there's so many different aspects of it, and I thought it might be valuable to all the people out there who are in careers or looking to build on their careers. Some of the categories of IoT were to watch: facilities and infrastructure management, industrial applications, energy and smart grid, which is getting a lot of attention recently in the United States, medical and healthcare, which I talked about in detail, transportation, building construction, smart buildings, environment, waste management, water resources, retail and supply chain, often overlooked, but it is really one of the biggest commercial Internet of Things projects going on. Communications, education, and of course, but not least, security. So I wanted to thank you all, for this presentation. I hope you learned a little bit from it, and feel free to use the slides. Feel free to contact or follow me on LinkedIn under Chuck Brooks. And I hope that you pay attention to this Internet of Things field and the importance of cybersecurity Internet of Things, because it really is it's something that can't be ignored. It touches all of us, and the threat surface is growing every day. And if we don't act now, we're going to pay later. Thank you.